Hello everyone, welcome to another video by Phoenix Medical Lectures. In today's video, we'll be seeing about peripheral edema and dyspnea. First, we'll be seeing about peripheral edema. So what is peripheral edema? It is a swelling which occurs in the tissue due to the expansion of interstitial fluid volume. So in order to understand what a peripheral edema is, we need to understand what interstitial fluid means. So the body is basically made up of 50 to 60% of water. So within this, we divide it into intracellular and extracellular. Intracellular is definitely more. 2/3 of the body fluids is going to be intracellular, and the remaining 1/3 is going to be extracellular. And this extracellular is further subdivided into interstitial and intravascular. Intravascular is simple. It's whatever fluid is within the vasculature, that is intravascular. The remaining part of the extracellular fluid, which is between the cell and its surroundings, is going to be interstitial. So there's going to be a free exchange of fluid, gas, solutes and electrolytes within the interstitium and the intravascular fluid. There's going to be free movement of fluid, gas, solutes and electrolytes. So coming to the main part. So what are the major causes of fluid displacement between the intravascular and the interstitial space? So there's this diagrammatic representation of the whole setup. So basically this is the left side of the heart and this is the right side of the heart. So the left side of the heart produces about 120 millimeters of mercury pressure, whereas in the artery, the mean arterial pressure is about 90 millimeters of mercury. So all this pressure that is generated is basically going to push blood. So finally, when it comes to the arterial side of the capillary, so basically we've divided the capillary here into the arterial side and the venous side. So in the arterial side of the capillary, the pressure that is generated is going to be 35 millimeters of mercury, which is the hydrostatic pressure. So what will this hydrostatic pressure do? It will push fluids into the interstitium. So basically this is the intravascular. There's artery, capillary and vein. So this whole thing is the intravascular space, which contains the intravascular fluid, which is also an ECF. Coming to the cells that I've drawn here, all the fluid that is going to be within these cells is going to be ICF, which is intracellular fluid. The remaining is going to be extracellular fluid, and so these are the cells, this is the vasculature. So whatever space that is between the cells and the vasculature is going to be interstitial fluid, the interstitial space which contains the interstitial fluid, which is also a part of the extracellular fluid. So coming to hydrostatic pressure, it is going to push fluid from the intravascular space into the interstitial space. So this is going to occur because the capillary bed is actually porous. So it is going to allow a certain amount of fluid to go to the interstitial space. So this is 35 millimeters of mercury. Second, we're going to see another pressure, which is namely the oncotic pressure. So what is this oncotic pressure? There are going to be proteins present in the intravascular fluid. So these proteins are negatively charged. So this negatively charged proteins is going to attract water. So water has 3. There's going to be 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen. So these hydrogen molecules are positively charged. So these negatively charged proteins are going to attract these positively charged hydrogen. So that is going to lead to a pull back of water into the intravascular space. So this pressure that is going to be generated is known as oncotic pressure. So coming to the arterial side of capillary, there is going to be 35 millimeters of mercury hydrostatic pressure and 25 millimeters of mercury oncotic pressure. So definitely this is higher. So what will happen? Fluid is going to come out. It is going to come out from the intravascular space and it's going to go into the interstitium. So this is not going to remain in the interstitium. What will happen is, in the venous side of the capillaries, there is going to be a decrease in hydrostatic pressure, which is 20 millimeters of mercury. But the oncotic pressure is going to remain the same. It is going to be 25 millimeters of mercury. So what will happen? There is going to be a uptake or intake of fluid from the interstitium into the intravascular space. So this is going to lead to fluid going, whatever fluid came out is going to go inside again and to the vein and is going to go, right? So along with the fluid, there are going to be certain a little bit of carbon dioxide and wastes are also going to go through the capillaries. So what is going to happen is when this fluid comes out, it came with oxygen and nutrients, right? Because of the porous surface of the capillaries, oxygen and nutrients came out, and then carbon dioxide and wastes are going to go in again, right? So this is about the hydrostatic and oncotic pressure. So again, there's something called the capillary endothelium in play, which we'll be seeing later. And coming to the lymphatic system, so there is still going to be a little bit of fluid which is going to remain in the interstitium, because see, the pressure difference here and the pressure difference here is not the same, right? So there's going to be a little amount of fluid that's going to remain in the interstitium. So what is going to happen with that fluid? The lymphatic system is going to take it. It's going to take it and then it's again going to send it into the venous system, right? So this is about the mechanism of like how the fluid is displaced. Okay. So we're going to see a quick recap of whatever we saw in the diagram. So the reason for fluid going from the intravascular to the interstitial space is because there is pressure exerted by the capillary bed, which is 35 millimeters of mercury. So since the capillary bed is porous, it will let water out, right? So the reason for fluid going from the interstitial to the intravascular space is that protein is present, which is negatively charged, whereas water is both positively and negatively charged, right? So that what is going to happen? It will attract the water molecules. So since proteins are heavy, they do not pass the porous capillary bed. So what will happen? The negative charge will pull back the water. Since the proteins are heavy, it is not going to come out into the interstitium, right? It is going to pull water from the interstitium into the intravascular space, thus creating what is known as the oncotic pressure, which is 25 millimeters of mercury. What else did we see? The arterial side of the capillary hydrostatic pressure is going to be 35, whereas the venous side is going to be 20. Whereas the oncotic pressure is going to be same on both sides, which is 25 millimeters of mercury. So due to this, fluid goes out on the arterial side and comes back into the venous side, right? But there is a little bit of fluid which is going to be remaining. So that little bit of fluid is going to be taken up by the lymphatic system, which is again sent back into the vein. Okay, this was about the mechanism. So coming to the causes of edema, what is going to be the causes? First, it's going to be hydrostatic pressure. So what did we see? If there is an increase in hydrostatic pressure, it is going to push water out into the interstitium. So definitely, as much as the hydrostatic pressure increases, it is going to lead to a increase in the edema. So first is increased hydrostatic pressure. So what are the causes? Hypertension. Hypertension is definitely going to cause an increase in pressure. As much as there's an increase in pressure, it's going to send out fluid, right? And right-sided heart failure. So basically, right-sided heart failure will also cause edema, left-sided heart failure will also cause edema. But right-sided heart failure will push the fluid back into the peripheral system, which is going to lead to peripheral edema. Whereas if there's a left-sided heart failure, it's going to push fluid back into the lungs. So that is going to cause a pulmonary edema. And then the DVT and compression. If there's a deep vein thrombosis, that will also lead to edema and increase in hydrostatic pressure. Coming to oncotic pressure. What did we see about oncotic pressure? If there is an increase in oncotic pressure, it is going to push fluid from the interstitium to the intravascular space, so there's going to be no edema. But if there is a decrease in oncotic pressure, it is definitely going to cause edema because there's going to be more fluid in the interstitium. So what is the main cause of oncotic pressure? Protein. Protein is essential for oncotic pressure to be present. So if there is some cause due to which protein is going to be, there's going to be a deficient protein, then that is the major cause of decrease in oncotic pressure. So what are these causes? Hepatic disease. These hepatic diseases will lead to nil protein production or very less protein production. That will lead to a decrease in oncotic pressure. Coming to malnutrition or malabsorption, if there is no intake of protein and there is no proper absorption of protein, that is going to lead to a decrease in oncotic pressure. Same goes with renal diseases. Renal diseases, what will happen? There is going to be a leak in protein. If there's some kind of renal disease, it's going to result in leak of protein in the urine. So that is also going to cause deficient protein leading to decrease in oncotic pressure. Okay, what did we see before? Capillary endothelial, which I told we'll discuss later. So, if there is any defect in the capillary endothelium, anything that will affect the capillary integrity, then that will lead to leakage, right? So, first is vascular injury or surgery. Anything that will lead to a injury to the endothelium that is going to cause fluid to go into the interstitial space. So, there's any vascular injury or any surgery, it's going to lead to edema. Coming to inflammation. So basically, this might lead to two things. Okay, so it leads to the secretion of histamine and prostaglandin. So what will happen? There'll be an increase in the amount of blood that flows into the arteries. Okay, there's going to be an increased fluid. This fluid, right, this blood, this will cause an increase in the capillary endothelial gaps as well. Right, there's already irritation. There's already like histamine and prostaglandin release, which is going to increase the blood flow as well, and it is also going to increase the gaps in the capillary bed, which will lead to a leakage of fluid, RBCs, WBCs, and protein into the interstitial space, thus causing edema. So the final one is lymphatic system. So lymphatic system was what was its job? It was going to take in whatever remaining fluid that was there in the interstitium, and it was going to send it back into the vein. So if there's any obstruction, like a tumor or like a lymphedema, and that will obstruct the lymphatic uptake of interstitial fluid. What is the other one? It is removal, surgical removal of lymph nodes. Where do we do this? Like predominantly in case of carcinomas. If there is a carcinoma and in case of suspicion of metastasis, then in order to curb metastasis, we tend to surgically remove lymph nodes. That will also affect the uptake of interstitial fluid by the lymphatic system. Okay, that was about peripheral edema. The next topic is dyspnea or breathlessness. So the basic respiration, how does it occur? So we need to know something known as the premotor cortex. The premotor cortex sends efferent to the muscles of the intercostal muscles and other muscles of respiration and brings about respiration. Same goes with an efferent from the brainstem that goes to the diaphragm. Okay, so that goes to the diaphragm, again it brings about respiration. These are efferents. Another signal from the diaphragm, right, the phrenic nerve that goes from the brainstem to the diaphragm, and then there's this feedback signal that goes to the presensory cortex. Okay, there's another thing here. Premotor cortex sends efferents, brainstem also sent efferents, and then there's this feedback signal that goes to the presensory cortex. Okay, so telling that whether there is a respiratory effort occurring. So that's what we're going to see, the basics of respiration. Okay, so again a quick recap. Nerves from the premotor cortex act on the intercostal muscles and other muscles of the respiration and brings about respiration. So phrenic nerve from the brainstem also acts on the diaphragm and it brings about respiration. These cause a signal to the presensory cortex. This will send a signal, a feedback signal to the presensory cortex whether there is any effort on respiratory muscles and the occurrence of a ventilatory effort. So if this signal is passed during any strenuous physical activities, then it is completely normal. There's no problem. But if this same signal is sent when the person is at rest, or if there is very mild or day-to-day activities, then that is what is known as dyspnea or breathlessness. So how these signals are mostly sent to the brain? So first thing we're going to see is chemoreceptors. And we're going to also see mechanoreceptors, and we're going to see something such as the slowly adapting receptors, the rapidly adapting receptors from the lungs, and C fibers from the lungs. So first coming to chemoreceptors. These chemoreceptors can be divided into central chemoreceptors and peripheral chemoreceptors. Central chemoreceptors are situated in the brainstem, right? Here itself, and mainly in the CSF. Hydrogen and carbon dioxide. There's an increase in carbon dioxide, then there is a signal which tells that the body is undergoing respiratory effort. Okay, so this is about the central chemoreceptors. Coming to the peripheral chemoreceptors, it is located in the carotid body and the aortic arch, right? So this predominantly oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this is going to again be the peripheral chemoreceptor, and it is going to send signals to the brainstem telling that there is a respiratory effort. Apart from this, there is something known as the mechanoreceptors right here from the intercostal muscles where Golgi apparatus and spindle fibers. If there's any kind of expansion, any kind of effort, it's going to again send signals to the brainstem telling that there is a respiratory effort. Final one, coming to lungs. From the lungs, there's basically three receptors: SA, RA, and C fibers. SA is for slowly adapting receptors, and RA is for rapidly adapting receptors. So slowly adapting receptors, if there's any kind of tension in the airway, then it is going to send signals to the brainstem. Coming to RA, rapidly adapting receptors, any kind of volume expansion in the lungs, okay, any kind of edema or something, if there's any expansion of the lungs, it is going to cause a signal. It's going to send a signal to the brainstem. That is rapidly adapting. Coming to C fibers, any kind of irritation, okay, any irritations, any irritating stimuli, any chemical stimuli, that is going to send signals to the brainstem. So this is how signals of respiratory effort is going to the brainstem. Any kind of any of these signals, if it's going to occur when there's strenuous physical activity, it is normal. But when it's going to occur when the person is at rest or if there's almost no work, then that is called dyspnea. So these together will produce something known as chest tightness. You know, like the dyspnea is going to produce a feeling of chest tightness. Coming to etiology. So we're going to divide the etiology into cardiovascular, respiratory, and neuromuscular. So first, coming to cardiovascular. Cardiovascular, the first thing we're going to see is congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure, through two mechanisms, it sends signal to the brainstem. First one is pulmonary edema. CHF is going to cause pulmonary edema. If there's pulmonary edema, there's going to be expansion, right? There's expansion in the lungs. It is going to send a signal to the brainstem through something known as RA, which is rapidly adapting receptors, right? This rapidly adapting receptors are going to send a signal to the brainstem that there is air hunger or respiratory effort. Coming to the second one, there's a decrease in oxygen as well. There is a decrease in oxygen anywhere it is detected in the carotid body or the aortic arch. It is going to send signals. It's a peripheral chemoreceptor. So it's going to send signals to the brainstem telling that there is respiratory effort. So this is how CHF plays out. Coming to anemia. If there is anemia, there's again going to be decreased oxygen. So anemia is reduced oxygen carrying capacity of the RBCs. So if there is a decrease in oxygen, it is going to be detected by the carotid body or in the carotid or in the aortic arch. So that is going to send signals to the brainstem. Similarly, in anemia, commonly there is an increase in heart rate. If there is an increase in heart rate, what happens? There is increase in end diastolic volume. Increase in diastolic volume is going to cause an increase in the blood flow into the left atrium again, which is going to again cause a backflow of blood into the pulmonary system, into the lungs, causing pulmonary edema again. This pulmonary edema will follow the previous mechanism that we saw. It is going to cause expansion, thus RAs are activated, thus sending a signal to the brainstem. Okay, that was about the cardiovascular system. Coming to the respiratory system. How does respiratory system send signals? First is 5 P's: pneumonia, pleurisy, pulmonary fibrosis, cancer, embolism. All of these, in one or the other way, activates the slowly adapting receptors, rapidly adapting receptors, and the C fibers, thus sending signal to the brainstem that the body is in need of air hunger, or there's a respiratory effort. Second one is COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So first one, there's going to be an increase in CO2. This increase in CO2, as we saw before, central chemoreceptor, right? In the CSF, if there's an increase in CO2 detection in the brainstem, then that is a central chemoreceptor telling the brain that there is a respiratory effort. Second one is decrease in oxygen. So that's a peripheral chemoreceptor in the carotid body or the aortic arch, telling the brain that the body is in need of air. Third one is lung compliance. So lung compliance, if there's any disturbance to the lung compliance, that is going to lead to mechanoreceptor sending signal to the brain. Third one is asthma. Immediately when someone thinks of asthma, we think of an irritation to the airway, right? Any irritation in the air passage. So this irritation is going to be a chemical stimuli, right? So this chemical stimuli is going to be taken up by the C fibers. C fibers are going to send the signal to the brainstem that the body has a respiratory effort. Next one is there's also going to be bronchoconstriction, right? This bronchoconstriction is going to cause ventilation issues, right? That is also going to cause dyspnea. Finally, neuromuscular causes. If there is any deconditioning of the muscles, or if there's any muscular disturbance, or if there's any neurological disturbance, all of these are going to cause the intercostal muscle mechanoreceptor activation. These mechanoreceptors in the intercostal muscles are going to act, and it is going to send signal to the brainstem that there is a respiratory effort. And finally, coming to obesity. Obesity is going to push the diaphragm down. Okay, this is going to send this feedback signal that we saw earlier, that there's going to be a feedback signal to the presensory cortex from the diaphragm, right? So that is going to send a signal that there is respiratory effort. Thank you.